In this episode, I'm going to be cutting out one of my ES logo inlays, and I'm going to be giving you guys just some easy inlay tips along the way. So this footage, by the way, is actually old footage from about, I think, 2016, 2017, from when I was producing the online guitar building school course, Building an OM Acoustic. And students of that course may recall that the inlay that I placed on the headstock of that guitar wasn't actually an inlay. I didn't inlay it. I actually used it as an overlay. So it was sitting on top of the headstock rather than embedded within it. I'm not going to get into the reasons why I did that here. I've talked about it in the past, but and honestly, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I probably, in retrospect, would have just gone with an inlay there. But that's neither here nor there. The point is the inlay cutting process is the same whether or not you actually route out a pocket and use it as an inlay. So without further ado, let's get to some of those inlay cutting tips. So first of all, you're going to need a couple things. What's really cool about inlay work is that you actually don't need much to get started. Now here we're just talking about cutting the inlay. For actually routing the pocket and installing it, you'll need a Dremel and the Dremel base and a couple other things. But since we're just talking about inlay cutting in this video, I'm going to talk about what's required to get that job done. So at a minimum, you're going to need a jeweler's saw and an inlay cutting board like you see here, with a hole drilled in the middle and a slit connecting the hole to the outside edge. Angling off the ends of the board like you see here allows better access so the saw's frame doesn't get held up by the board. In addition to these two things, and depending on what you are inlaying, you may need a drill with some small bits. I like to use a 1/16 of an inch bit in most cases. You can see that on this particular inlay there are some extra fine holes for extra tight spaces, and so the 1/16 of an inch bit wouldn't really work there. So I actually use a dental burr, which is really small, held in a in my Dremel, in my plunge Dremel, so I can plunge that dental burr down into the work to create a really fine entrance hole in really tight corners like you see on this inlay. And here's a little tip within the tip here, and that's go to your dentist, and if you're lucky, he's a good guy, a nice guy, and he will actually sterilize the used bits for you and give them to you. Maybe, perhaps sell them to you, but in my case, he just gives them to me. A set of needle files of various shapes will be useful for cleaning up and shaping misshapen edges and things like that. It's also nice to have a small, low-profile vise like the StewMac nut slotting vise and a magnifier. These last two items are less essential, but certainly improve your work. And lastly, you're going to need double stick tape for sticking your paper templates of the pattern that you wish to cut out, for sticking that paper template down onto the substrate, the piece of wood that you're cutting your material out of. Some people use low-tack glues for this. I can't remember if I used to use Duco cement or something like that, but some long set time low-tack glue to stick down the template. I don't like using the glue as much. I find it hard to settle into position and to not get ripples and bubbles in the paper. I have found double stick tape to work well for my needs. The next tip is don't just start cutting. You need to plan where you're going to start and where you're going to finish to make the cuts as easy as possible for you. And that way you can also drill holes at appropriate locations, like say on really hard turns, again, to make the cuts easier for you. On this ES inlay, I know, for example, that I need to save the thinnest, weakest arms of this script for last. I can cut the outside edges of those arms, but I have to leave a bridge of material connecting it to the rest of the inlay and then cut out that bridge later on. Because if I try to cut everything all at once for those two skinny arms, then they're going to break. Leaving that bridge of material there also allows me an opportunity to clean up and smooth the outside edge of those arms. If I tried this without the bridge there, that arm would surely break. Okay, for the next tip, I'm going to explain to you how to make hard turns like a 90-degree turn with your jeweler's saw without breaking the blade. Because if you just come up to your 90-degree turn and then turn the blade fully that 90 degrees, that twisting motion, because it doesn't have the space in the channel that it's cut so far, it does not have the space to twist and turn itself, so it's actually going to bind up, catch, and then break immediately. The trick is this: when you reach your turn, just start marching the saw blade in place, meaning you're just moving up and down without moving forward at all or doing anything, without really cutting. And while you're marching in place, you're then going to gently pull the back edge, the toothless edge of the blade, against the sidewall of your channel. And still marching it in place, you're going to slowly start your turn. And what that's doing is you're pulling it back a little bit against that edge so that it's not biting into the wood so much. And as you turn it, the teeth are going to cut itself a little hole there. It's essentially like it's cutting itself a drill hole. Okay, so the next tip is to cut directly on your lines rather than cutting outside of your lines with the intention of filing or shaping down to it later. And the reason is because these super fine jeweler's saw blades are actually super easy to control and very accurate. In fact, often more accurate than what you can do with shaping after the fact. So you'll have more of a difficult time if you cut outside of your lines and shape down to it than if you just attempted to cut your inlay as accurately as you can in the first place. Now, I often pull out the needle files at the end, if necessary, just for a little cleanup of certain areas where I didn't do so well, but it's also often the case that I don't need to use the needle files at all, depending on what the inlay is and what it's like, and how I did. But anyway, that's sort of a counterintuitive rule there. It's good to know that because there are a lot of things within woodworking and lutherie where you want to cut outside your lines and then carefully shape your way down to it. This is not one of those cases. You want to strive for an accurate cut the first time. And a final tip here: if you notice that you're starting to drift, your saw is slowly drifting away from your line, you can actually use the jeweler's saw blade as sort of like a file. And you can just do this reflexively as you're going. If you notice here, notice how I start scraping the side of the blade against the side of the wall, and what that's going to do is the teeth, kind of working like a rasp or file teeth, they will shave that excess material down off the side of your cut until you're back on line. So that is preferable over instead, say, just correcting your cut and slowly cutting back in towards your line and then having to locate that problem later on and correct it, say, with the needle files. You can actually correct it on the fly as you go with the jeweler's saw. That's pretty cool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the tips, and I hope you get to use them and you get into a little inlay work yourselves. Take care. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.